The Media Project.
For the latest Are We Here Yet podcast, we offer 4 perspectives sure to keep you contemplating on this upcoming Indigenous Peoples Day. Our Season 3 guest, Doug Harris, retired archivist for the Narragansett tribe, spoke to us regarding New England's ceremonial stone landscape for episodes 87 and 88. We featured 2 clips here. The first focused on answering the question, what is this place and who are we? The second, which ends our podcast, focuses on his groundbreaking work alongside Smithsonian documentarian Ted Timrick, our guest for episode 132, which has dispelled many falsehoods about the peoples of this part of North America, how they lived, traded, and thrived for thousands of years. Sandwiched between our clips of Doug Harris, we offer contemporary Native American poets and their work with poet and essayist Joshua Michael Stewart, a frequent guest of our show. We originally aired his reading of these 6 poems in 2021. Joshua is the author of 3 books of poetry, his latest being 2022's Love Something. His soon-to-publish Welcome Home, Russell Edson combines the graphic novel with the prose poem. He writes for The Media Project under the feature The Way of Wind and Stream. But first, my essay from 2020 entitled Borders. I was investigating the early colonial New England period of King Philip's War for several years, and this led me to taking a deeper dive into the competing concepts over land ownership between indigenous and English colonial cultures. It didn't escape me at the time that I was doing this amateur investigative work while the question of immigration in the U.S. was speeding into a raging crisis. What results here are my thoughts on a very deep, very flawed piece of debris just underneath our skin that continues to leave scars on our culture. We can and should do better. This issue has only become more polarizing and central to the presidential election in 2024. I hope you enjoy. We are obsessed with borders. Part of this is primordial. Humans like sharp edges because these borders enclose us in a safe space. Think cats in a box. The farther we get from our ancestral start, the more we consistently strive to nurse our wounds in the corner of a concrete bunker. The English concept of property ownership was rooted in well-defined borders. Your house was your castle. Your pasture was not meant for another's animal. When the English first came into contact with the natives of New England, the disparity between how each society conceptualized borders, and therefore ownership, eventually led to conflict. Despite our contemporary ideas about the noble Indian, long lost to modern society, weakened from disease and depravity, illiterate and entirely at the mercy of European legal and military prowess, modern Native Americans of the Northeast tell a different story. As far back as the 17th century, Wabanaki and many other peoples of the Northeast were diligently attaining knowledge for the European spoken word. In the first 50 years of English settlement, it became clear to many in both cultures that the native idea of ownership over land versus the concept in English hands differed with fatal consequence. Natives believed in a kind of ownership of the commons. Those who were best capable this season of reaping the most from a particular area or parcel were given priority over other bands. This ownership changed season to season. Their English neighbors took a more permanent and defined approach to ownership of land and the borders that delineated one's place over another. The English obsession with ownership came from a chaotic start to the 17th century. As elite restrictions on lands held in common spread, an increase in poverty made it a crime for the landless to wander the countryside in a vain attempt to find a home. It was during this time that English noblemen coined the term white trash. Yes, this denigration was baked into American culture from the very beginning. Land-hungry farmers, along with Calvinist tradesmen, Catholic royalists, at different points in history, they came to America when England wouldn't have them anymore. By the 1670s, New England natives were becoming literate in limited but strategic numbers. They began fighting bogus treaties and land deeds in Massachusetts, Plymouth, and Connecticut courts. This, along with other strains on their relations, set in motion what became the conflagration known as King Philip's War. And so it is. We've always been a bit paranoid what is sitting at the edge of our field. We need to know those enclosures are keeping our cattle in and our neighbors out. We seek to tell the rest of the world, this is mine. I fought for it. You can't have it. You can't use it. Each generation of Americans has the same befalling of innocence. We're quick to dominate when we fear the onslaught of the unknown, the foreign, the dark-skinned, or the alien-speaking. Even as I write, pundits claim a disaster at our borders which does not exist. We've refined our zeal for the absurd in the United States. We create disasters within the borders of other countries and despair when their people knock upon our door to ask for a better life. It is time to shed our fears, cast off our mark of colonizer. It is time to grow up. It is time to stop suffering needlessly. We suffer from a malady that I would imagine nearly all colonizers suffer from. We suffer because we've wrought suffering on generations of others. We suffer from paranoia, the kind that comes from generational guilt when a society knows they're wrong and refuses to apologize. How do we reconcile with creating so much pain in a place? It seems and there's many narratives that tell the story of America in general, every place in America. But how do we reconcile in a place where it seems like in cycles, generation after generation, and in different ways, we create such dislocation and such pain?
Well, we have to find which we were talking about.
Yeah.
And
well, maybe the question then is, how do we get to a point when the we gets to be all of us? I don't know. Is that even the right question?
well, I think that we're attempting to evolve to that point. Um, I think that that a significant crossroads occurred when um, Barack Obama was elected president of these United States. Now, what has happened since then and what happened before then has to be looked at and has to be assessed. But the American we is constantly attempting to define what this place is and by what system it will be addressed and will move forward. And we never quite seemed comfortable with defining that. Democracy is something that not all Americans are comfortable with. And some of them express their opinion of what democracy is when they had the demonstrations inside the Capitol of the United States. They demonstrated their lack of appreciation and love for what we might call small d democracy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a democracy that was evolved from indigenous practices. We could go back to people like Benjamin Franklin, who were
Quoting the
dialogue.
Quoting the Iroquois, right? 7 nations. Yeah.
Back.
Yeah.
This is not what the Iroquois patterned, but this is how we, the Americans, have interpreted, and we live with it, and sometimes by it.
It's a complicated thing, right? Sometimes in personal conversations, I've said to people, it's like a good marriage. Sometimes we love our country because of what it is. Sometimes we love it in spite of what it is. Sometimes we love what it could be and we stick with it. It's a complicated relationship. It's a multifaceted relationship, and it's constantly evolving. And we hope in one of these cycles that we come to a deeper understanding of each other and not so much remain at odds. But there's a story here that needs to be told. It almost feels like we need to go through a collective, like a truth and reconciliation process. In other words, so another example I'll give to explain what I'm trying to ask. If we take it back to closer to home here in New England for just a moment, we have so much mythology around the people who were here before white settlement, and even down to the moment that English settlement first happened, immediately where we are in our part of New England, that somehow, there was this land bestowed to us, and, there's nobody else here. And it's a miracle. God must have wanted us to be here. None of this is really factual. And the vast majority of us, New Englanders or non-New Englanders alike in the United States, don't know the actual story of settlement and what happened here in the first, say, generation or two of English habitation.
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that the first Europeans who came here sought to transplant what they knew in the place of what they were encountering. And for many of them, they were encountering a wilderness, and they were attempting to transform that wilderness into the manor lands of England and France that they had come from.
Mm.
And you can only do that, or you can best do that, if you wipe clean the slate of the reality of what you're in.
Is it even fair to call it a wilderness when so many people lived here, loved here, they died here, they created culture together here?
Well, but wilderness is, that's the English term for a place that is primarily inhabited by trees and vegetation, and that was the preference of the indigenous people. They had learned to live with trees and with plants, and to partake of those trees and plants in a manner that was balanced. And I have to admit, I wasn't there, so I don't really know. But the research that I have done, and the words that have been shared with me by in oral history, is basically that we lived in balance and in harmony with what we found here, and that trees were respected, they were loved, plant life was respected and loved, and was only partaken of to the extent that it was sustained balance and harmony. Now, again, those are terms that have come down to me and that's translated through English. And what balance and harmony truly means, I would be foolish to say that I know that. But I know a lot about it based upon the oral history that has been shared.
And one would imagine that since human habitation was quite successful on these shores for thousands and thousands of years, that there had to have been some level of what we now call sustainability.
Yes, well, you only take what you need and not just what you want.
Right.
What you need is sustained in balance with what allows there to be plenty the next season.
The first poem I'm going to read is actually by a Navajo writer by the name of Talkia Hani. And then it says interpreted by Louis Watchman. So I am not quite sure when this poem was written. It could have been the 1800s or it could have been more recent. It's in the Everyman's Pocket Library book called Poems of Gratitude. Anyways, here's the poem. War God's Horse Song. I am the turquoise woman's son, on top of belted mountain. Beautiful horses, slim like a weasel. My horse with a hoof like a striped agate, with his fetlock like a fine eagle plume. My horse whose legs are like quick lightning, whose body is an eagle plume arrow. My horse whose tail is like a trailing black cloud. The little holy wind blows through his hair. My horse with a mane made of short rainbows. My horse with ears made of round corn. My horse with eyes made of big stars. My horse with a head made of mixed waters. My horse with teeth made of white shell. The long rainbow is in his mouth for a bridle, and with it I guide him. When my horse neighs, different colored horses follow. When my horse neighs, different colored sheep follow. I am wealthy because of him. Before me, peaceful. Behind me, peaceful. Under me, peaceful. Over me, peaceful. Peaceful voice when he neighs. I am everlasting and peaceful. I stand for my horse. So now the first thing you notice, and actually it probably was more originally a song than a poem, but what you'll notice in a lot of these poems is this chant-like cadence, and which is very popular in a lot of indigenous type of writing, throughout the world. And, poets like Allen Ginsberg fell in love with these more ancient style of these chants, these prayers. A lot of them sound like prayers. And poets like Allen Ginsberg and others incorporated that style into their poems as well. I mentioned N. Scott Momaday before, and I have quite a few of his books. But In the Presence of the Sun was the first book of his I ever bought. And N. Scott Momaday was probably the first Native American writer I came across. And as I said, he's also a novelist. He won the Pulitzer for his novel, what is it called? A House Made of Dawn in 1972. But this is probably my favorite poem of his. And it's called Earth, and I Gave You Turquoise. earth, and I gave you turquoise. When you walked singing, we lived laughing in my house and told old stories. You grew ill when the owl cried. We will meet on Black Mountain. I will bring corn for planting, and we will make fire. Children will come to your breast. You will heal my heart. I speak your name many times. The wild cane remembers you. My young brother's house is filled. I go there to sing. We have not spoken of you, but our songs are sad. When Moon Woman goes to you, I will follow her white way. Tonight they dance near Phoenix by the 7 elms. There your loom whispers beauty. They will eat mutton and drink coffee till morning. You and I will not be there. I saw a crow by Red Rock standing on one leg. It was the black of your hair. The years are heavy. I will ride the swiftest horse. You will hear the drumming hooves. I also mentioned Joy Harjo, and she is the Poet Laureate of the United States. Her most recent book I believe is called American Sunrise. I also have one of her other collections, Conflict Resolution for Holy Beings, and it's right here. But the poem I'm actually going to read, that is Joy's, is actually from this anthology, How to Love the World, Poems of Gratitude and Hope. And that's edited by a local Vermont poet by the names of James Cruz. He's actually edited a couple anthologies that are terrific, and he's a great poet in his own right. You should check him out, James Cruz. And the poem of Joyce that I will read is called Eagle Poem. And again, you would hear this this prayer cadence to it. Eagle Poem. To pray, you open your whole self, to sky, to earth, to sun, to moon, to one whole voice that is you. And know there is more than you can't see, can't hear, can't know except in moments steadily growing and in language that aren't always sound, but other circles of motion. Like eagle that Sunday morning over Salt River, circled in blue sky and wind, swept over hearts clean with sacred wings. We see you, see ourselves, and know that we must take the utmost care and kindness in all things. Breathe in, knowing we are made of all this, and breathe, knowing we are truly blessed because we were born and die soon within a true circle of motion. Like eagle rounding out the morning inside us, we pray that it will be done in beauty, in beauty. Of course, one of the most famous Native American writers is Sherman Alexie. I think he's more famous for his stories and his novels, and of course, the movie Smoke Signals. But of course, he's also a terrific poet. I know there's been some controversy around him lately of some ill behavior he has done. I don't know the exact details, but he is one of the most known and gifted Native American writers, and probably one of his most popular poetry collections is The Business of Fancy Dancing. And I will read the poem Evolution. Buffalo Bill opens a pawn shop on the reservation right across the border from the liquor store, and he stays open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. and the Indians come running in with their jewelry, television sets, a VCR, a full-length beaded buckskin outfit. It took Inez Muse 12 years to finish. Buffalo Bill takes everything the Indians have to offer, keeps it all cataloged and filed in a storage room. The Indians pawn their hands, saving the thumbs for last. They pawn their skeletons, falling endlessly from the skin. And when the last Indian has pawned everything but his heart, Buffalo Bill takes that for $20, closes up the pawn shop, paints a new sign over the old, calls his venture the Museum of Native American Culture, charges the Indians $5 a head to enter. Now, one of the lesser-known Native American poets, who is one of my favorites, is Adrian C. Lewis. He's wrote many poetry collections. He actually has a movie, and the movie is called Skins. He's a terrific writer. A lot of his poems, he writes them as if they are just letters to people. And the book I'll be reading from is one of my favorites. It's Bone and Juice. And the poem I will read is called "This is the Time of Grasshoppers and All That I See is Dying." This is one of those poems that sound like it's written to it's like a letter. And it's written to Colleen, who is his wife. And this was during the time when she had early onset Alzheimer's. Colleen, this is the time of grasshoppers, and all that I see is dying, except for my virulent love for you. The Cowturdville Star Times, which usually has a typo in every damn column, says the grasshoppers this year are as big as Buicks, and that's not bad. But then we get to 2 points page of who had dinner with whom at the bowling alley cafe, and who went shopping at Target in Rapid City, and thus the High Church of Adrian, the obscure, is sacked. Even my Dylan tapes are fading, becoming near comic antiques. The grasshoppers are destroying our yard, and they're as big as my middle finger saluting God. The grass is yellow. The trees look like Agent Orange has hit, but it's only the jaw work of those drab, armored insects who dance in profusion and pure destruction. Sweet woman, dear love of my life, when you're not angry and sputtering at everything and everyone, you become so childlike, so pure. Your voice seems to have grown higher recently, almost a little girl pitch. Today, like most days, I have you home for your 2-hour reprieve from the nursing home prison. We're sitting at the picnic table in the backyard, staring at the defoliation of lilacs, brain matter, and honeysuckle. You're eating a Hershey bar, and a crystal glob of snot is hanging from your nose. I reach over, pinch it off, and wipe it on my jeans. You thrust the last bite of chocolate into my mouth as a demented grasshopper jumps onto your ear. You scream. I howl with laughter until you do too. Happiness comes with a price. This is the time of grasshoppers, and all that I see is dying except for my swarming love for you. Last night on PBS, some lazy guy being screwed to death by legislation, by legions of viral invisibility, blurted the great cliche of regret. I wish I could be 20 again and know what I know now. My own regrets are equally foolish, and I wonder how the hell is it I've reached a place where I'd give what's left of my allotment of sunsets and frozen dinners for some unholy replay of just 1 hour in some nearly forgotten time and place. Darling, in the baked soil of the far west, I first saw the ant lions, those hairy little bugs who dug funnel traps for ants in the dry earth. At 12, looking over the edge of one such funnel, surrounded by a circle of tiny stones in the sand, I aimed a beam of white light from my magnifying glass and found I could recreate a hell of my own accord. Poverty and boredom made me cruel early on. The next summer, while digging post holes, I found a catch of those grotesque yellow bugs we called children of the earth, so I piled matches atop of them and barbecued their ugliness. I was at war with insects. In my 15th summer, I got covered with ticks in the sagebrush, and that fall I nervously lost my cherry in a cat house called the Green Front and got cursed with crabs, but that's not what I want to sing about at all. Come on now. This is no bug progression. This ain't no insect sonata. This is only misdirection, a sleight of hand upon the keys, and the unholy replay of just 1 hour in some nearly forgotten time and place that I'd like to return to will remain myth or maybe a holy mystery. And let's not call these bloodworms poetry or a winter count of desperate dreams, when reality is much simpler. Colleen, I swear to Christ, this is the time of grasshoppers, and all that I see is dying except my sparkling love for you. I actually had the luck of getting to know Mr. Adrian C. Lewis through Facebook, and I actually was able to correspond with him quite a few times. I actually even tried to get him to come. He lived out west, and I was trying to get him to come to Massachusetts to do a reading. But unfortunately, by time I got to know him and asked him to come to read, his wife already passed, and his health was declining. And actually, it wasn't too long after I asked that he actually ended up passing away. But again, I got to know him a little bit. We corresponded. And after his passing, I wrote a poem for him that, and I kind of, I adopted his style of writing it as a letter, very basically off that poem. And this, I started this conversation by saying that, by reading these poems, I am not a Native American, and I am not a Native American, but I do have a personal history with being a Native American, which is explained in this poem. So this is a poem I wrote for Adrian, and it's called Buried Deep as a Bullet. Adrian, when my mother told me that my great-grandfather was a full-blooded Sioux, my only question was, when can I get a horse and a bow and arrows? If she said our ancestors were dragons, I would have shot snot out of my nose to breathe fire. But the stupid kid, me, grew up and stopped believing everything his mother says. He becomes a stupid adult who believes in nothing except death. He wonders what a Sioux was doing farming tobacco in Kentucky hills, wonders about documents that prove tribal enrollment, reservation assignment, and finds nothing but family folklore. It's one thing to dream you're a star quarterback, and another to believe you were always on the team, and then learn you never even made the roster. There's a pride that doesn't belong to me. just another thing I believed white men had stolen. I carried mine jutting out of my breast pocket, pulled it out at kindergarten, show and tell, scratched a black X on my college application. I loved to hate the other side of me, the white side of me, the forked tongue, the wazichu. By the time I was 10, I could name more warriors and chiefs at the Battle of Little Bighorn than I could name U.S. presidents. I've often dreamed of pissing on Custer's grave. In the 3rd grade, my teacher displayed Thanksgiving cutouts, turkeys and cornucopias, pilgrims and multicolored corn. I told her about my great-grandfather, and she said, "You must be very proud," and I was, and I loved my great-grandfather more than anyone else dead a year before I was born. I sat tall in my seat, raised my hand high when there was a picture of buffalo in the textbook. My whole body shimmied when the teacher turned my way. I was ready to be called to the front to lecture on what it was like to be one of America's first people. But instead she said, "Thanks to Indians, bison almost went extinct." My jaw unlatched. I shook my head because even at that age I knew the fur trade had wiped out the buffalo. But before I could speak my utter disgust, she shot a finger in my direction and said, "Keep quiet. You don't know everything about Indians." I told my mother and she was irate, but not enough to go down there and knock the teeth out of that bitch's mouth. Hell, if she said that shit today, she'd be out of a job, slapped with a lawsuit. But that was 1982. It turns out I wasn't even Native. By the time I learned of this, the last thing I wanted to be was exactly what I was, a white guy who called himself Indian. I stopped talking about my great-grandfather, going to powwows, searching for some kind of connection through thunderdrum and ancestral song. Stopped thinking I belonged. But Adrian, that teacher's sneer is buried deep as a bullet, unremovable, too close to the spine, even if it wasn't meant for me.
We go back 6,000 or more years or so, and the landscape is much different. And so I'd like you to talk a little bit about some of this work surrounding the submerged landscape. This we're talking particularly about along the coasts of where Massachusetts and Rhode Island meet, I think. And if we went back to this time period, what first of all, offer the listener some context. What do we find is happening there?
Well, I first have to invoke the name of Ted Timmer, who is my partner in doing these studies. And he is an associate at the Smithsonian Institution.
Oh,
so he's in dialogue with a number of other scientists. But in the discussions that Ted and I have had, and the films, the videotapes that we have done as a part of our analysis, we encountered a young man who was Micmac, who happened to be at the United South and Eastern Tribes. And I was doing a presentation with associates from the University of Rhode Island, where I was participating in a study of the offshore environment on a grant from the now blanking on the federal agency and its initials. But what we were studying was what in the offshore environment, coastal environment, likely to need to be protected as wind turbines were being erected. And with the erection of wind turbines, you have to disturb a certain amount of soil.
You're gonna anchor them to the ocean floor. That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. What in that process should be looked out for? Well, there was a story that came from a Narragansett elder, Ellicott, and she said that the ancient villages of the Narragansett were once out where the ocean is now. I posed that to Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and basically they put funding into analyzing and seeing what might be found in the offshore environment. Well, as we were giving a report to the United South and Eastern Tribes on what we had done at the University of Rhode Island, what was, to our shock, a voice came out of the darkness in this presentation we were giving. And it basically said that there was a young man who had been the cultural resource director at Micmac. And he had been in a sweat lodge with a man who was, he referred to as his Soto Cree uncle. And this man spoke of an experience. And I asked the young man if he would come to the Narragansett trial, and we could videotape him retelling the story. And he came with a drum and a second drummer, and they told the story. But the story that they basically told was of a journey that was taken periodically, and it would come across the Great Lakes and out to the St. Lawrence Seaway,
Mm-hmm.
and out into the Bay of Fundy, and ultimately would go to a place called Kelly's Mountain. In Kelly's Mountain, in Maine, was a place where a great spirit had once resided in a cave. So he began to tell the story that the Soto Cree ancestors used to take this journey across the Great Lakes, multiple Great Lakes, and into the St. Lawrence Seaway, and then on out into the Atlantic Ocean, and ultimately to Micmac country, to this particular cave. But then they would spend a month there and do ceremony, and then they would go down the coast and around Florida and up the to the Mississippi River, and then take the Mississippi River back up north to
Micmac country again. Wow.
Oh, they would take it back up the Mississippi River back up to the Great Lakes.
Yep.
And then go back across the Great Lakes and go back to where as Soto Cree people, where they lived.
Wow.
This is a great journey that's happening periodically to honor, and the honor was to honor the spirit that had been responsible for halting the Ice Age.
Interesting. Okay.
And the spirit who dwelled in this cave was Guruska, the ancient spirit of the Micmac people. And he had been, we checked with a historian who said that Guruska had been given the responsibility to go and fight the frost monsters. And he began that fight. He was, and realized that he should not kill them all, but should leave some, because winter, the earth required a time of dormancy.
For rejuvenation.
Exactly.
Wow.
And so he did not kill all of the frost monsters. But he killed enough in order for the Ice Age to abate. Now, I was totally blown away by this story that this young man told. But this was a story out of his culture. Well, Ted Timrick and I documented that and put that together as a part of a story that we looked at, because University of Rhode Island and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management had not, that research had not given us this key factor, this of the journey down the east coast of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
And what Ted Timrick was finding was that there were pieces of artifacts made of Rama chert that could be found all along the East Coast. And part of the story was that somehow or other, the people who would do this ceremony to deal with Gluska were making a connection with chert from Rama Bay. And this chert from Rama Bay had a particular mineral signature. So if you found it in North Carolina, it was clear that it was chert from Rama Bay.
Wow.
And Rama Bay is up north of Labrador.
That's right. Yeah.
So the question that we had was, well, were these Soto Crees going first to northern Labrador to get this Rama chert, or were they making connection with other traders who would get the Rama chert?
And it's heading down the coast in that way, through trade. Wow.
We're finding in North Carolina and in Virginia, all along that coast, the Atlantic coast, there are artifacts of Rama chert that are being located. The only one place in the world that you can get this particular chert from is Rama Bay. Well, when we begin to tell this story and I have to credit Ted Timmerick for laying out. Ted had spent more than 30 years doing work for the Smithsonian, with Smithsonian scientists. And some of the work was being done in Labrador, among the tribes of Labrador, the Nazca people. But 30 years ago, Ted had done interviews with the scientists who were there, and he then went back with them within the last couple of years and asked some of the same questions. And the scientists now could give very different answers to the questions because their reputations were not on the line.
Yeah, I get you. It's nothing holding them back.
Nothing holding them back. They could now speak what they could speak the science.
Yeah, right.
As they knew it to be.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.